Welcome to Job Tips, the career development channel. In this video, how to address the challenging interviewing question or statement. Tell me about a time when you were demoted. That is coming up. Okay, so the interview is coming along beautifully well. Everything is running on all cylinders. You've checked all the boxes as far as qualifications, job duties, responsibilities, role requirements, etc. The conversation is coming along extremely well. You get a sense that you are the one they're going to hire. And then they ask you a question which may apply to you. Tell me about a time when you were demoted, and how did you handle it? Now, if you've never been demoted, doesn't apply. You can simply say, well, it's never happened. I've never been demoted. I've always either stayed in my role or moved up. Perfectly fine. End of that part of the conversation. If it has happened, though, be honest about it and tell them it's happened, because they'll find out in their background check, possibly. And you don't want to be found out to have told an untruth, because that will sink your chances of getting this job. So let's look at this for a moment. Even if back in the day when you were demoted, maybe you took a voluntary demotion or you were just demoted, maybe you didn't handle it very well, but since then you've learned some things from it and you've gotten wiser as a result. Listen, when they do a background check and they see that maybe you were demoted, it's not common that they ask, how did he handle it or how did she handle it? They'll see that, perhaps, that you were demoted or you stepped down into a lesser role if they get to that far in the background check. But what you don't want to say is, yes, they demoted me and I threw a temper tantrum, I didn't like it, and I sulked, and now I'm exaggerating, but the point is you don't want to give an indication that you handled the situation negatively. What you want to do is let them know how you learned from it, grew as a result, or maybe you were better in the new role at that time in your career. Maybe you had been promoted to a level that you weren't quite ready for, and they moved you back down. Nothing wrong with that, because many people go through being prematurely promoted into a role for which they're not necessarily properly prepared. And they have to kind of step back a little bit to continue their molding process, the development process, until they can be promoted when the time is right. Okay? So let's say that you had that demotion, and it was for that reason. All right? Say it. Well, I was promoted a little bit too early. The company thought I was right for the promotion. They moved me up. As it turned out, at that point in time, it wasn't quite the right time. I needed more development at that time in my career, and so they moved me back down for a while. Perfect. Many folks have experienced that. Now, let's say that you had that demotion, though, that you didn't handle well because maybe you didn't feel the demotion was justified. They moved you down and you thought, what's up with that? But maybe you've learned some things along the way. You can then say, well, there was a time when I was demoted from where I was to one level lower. And while at the time I didn't like being demoted, I certainly learned a few things from it. What I got from it was this. Only you know what that is, so come up with that. You think about that before the interview and find out, what did you gain from that? Do some serious introspection, some looking within. What did you gain from it? What did you learn? What wisdom did you learn from that experience? And then share that as part of your answer. And then let them know that from that experience, I learned this, I became better as a result in this way. In the company, and then start telling stories about how that experience helped you become better in your career. Okay? Then you can say something along the lines of, that adaptability or that ability to learn from a situation like that is ideal in someone applying for this kind of job today. And isn't that the kind of person that you want after all? Right? Something along those lines. Another way that you can answer that question, Let's assume that you voluntarily stepped down because of political issues or whatever the case may be. You didn't like the pressure that the job had and so on and so forth, but you stepped down into a lesser role, yet you were able to mentor the person who became your manager, you having been in that job before. You could use that example and say, there was a time when I was in a manager role or whatever the role was, and at that time within the organization, the corporate political climate was extremely thick, very heavy. And at that time, I just frankly didn't like it. And so I voluntarily stepped down into one role less than that to give myself some pressure relief. At that time in my life, that's what I needed then. But the way I used my experience still was to help, when asked, the new manager who was promoted up, having had that experience. So I still benefited the organization with having had that experience, but not necessarily carrying that burden on my shoulders. Perfect. That's another great way to respond if that was the reason you were demoted, or that you took a voluntary demotion, or even if it was not a voluntary demotion, but if at that moment you said, you know what, I'm going to be okay from this, I'm going to help the person who is now in that chair, and you served in that kind of role in addition to your regular duties. That tells the interviewer that you are the kind of person that can gracefully step down from a role if necessary, yet not be childish about it, and still benefit the organization given your knowledge and experience. Okay? Hopefully this helps you a bit if that question ever does come up in your interview. It doesn't come up all the time, but it will come up from time to time, and be prepared for that if, in fact, you ever took a demotion. And remember, toward the end of the answer, always interject carefully, and isn't that the kind of person that you're looking for? One who can adapt to situations, even if they're not necessarily favorable to him or her at the time, and move forward successfully within the organization. Now you're closing the sale. And remember, your job in this interview is not just to interview, it's to nail it and get this job. And you want to ask for the sale. Let me know in the comments below of a time when you, if it applies, were demoted, and how did you handle it? Also, feel free to suggest other topics for future videos. Additionally, I would be so honored and thrilled if you would subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to not miss out on future videos. Well, for job tips, I hope you get that job and you have that dynamic career that you want to have.